Hello again, listeners. Sharita here once again, and we have a treat for you today. It's double feature day. Joining us for a special feature interview is Nidhi Talati, Associate Director of Financial Planning at First Command Financial Services. As the Associate Director of Financial Planning, Nidhi leads the financial planning consultant team to deliver ongoing support and training for the First Command field force. She builds collaborative relationships with First Command financial leaders, business partners, and stakeholders to drive change and enhance the financial planning experience for both advisors and their clients. She also works closely with First Command's technical teams to translate business needs into development objectives. Prior to joining First Command, Nidhi was Regional Vice President at Primerica. She has nearly 20 years of experience in the financial planning industry and is a CFP professional. She is licensed with the Texas Department of Insurance and also holds FINRA Series 6, 7, 63, 65, 24, and 26 certifications. She earned her Bachelor of Science in Economics from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania and her certificate in financial planning from Boston University. It is such a pleasure to be chatting with you once again today, Nidhi. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be joining you and your listeners again.
Absolutely. Well, as you know, as our listeners already know, I am a huge fan of First Command. You all have really revolutionized our military family financial life, just giving us that insight. So I would love for you to remind our listeners about just how First Command can help military families.
Great. Well, First Command is a financial planning firm. That's what we do. And our focus is specifically on serving the financial needs of our nation's active duty military families. And the primary thing that we help them with is financial coaching. So, what that means is that we help them develop a comprehensive financial plan, not only develop it, but also implement it. And then over time, as life and priorities change, we coach you along the way to make sure that those financial behaviors stay in sync with your goals. You know, Sharita, we know this, we've talked about this. Most people have never seriously thought about financial planning.
Mhm.
They usually think it's just for the wealthy. It's a high end service, it's not available to them. And even if it were, probably couldn't afford it anyway, right? That's the common thinking. But at First Command, there's no minimum net worth to work with an advisor. And we regularly work with those young families that are just getting started because we know that the earlier in your career you start planning, the more likely you are to achieve that financial security. We've also eliminated all the planning fees for service members and their families because we really just didn't want there to be any reason for a military family not to sit down with a First Command advisor and to really find out if financial planning is something that they could benefit from. We offer the planning service to our nation's active duty families as a totally complimentary service. And we do that because we know that the best way to get started, the best way to get financially squared away is through a financial plan. So we've really tried to take away as many barriers as we can.
I think it is so cool how you all are so intentionally tuning in to the needs of military families and removing those barriers like, hey, you have to have X number of dollars to invest, or this much information, or hey, you have to pay us this in order to do this. Like the fact that there's no fees associated and affiliated with those costs still just blows my mind. And it's so good. So let's say that one of our listeners decided to meet with a financial command advisor. What would that look like? What might they be able to expect?
Yeah, the process of financial coaching essentially comes down to this. We're going to help you develop and implement a financial plan. So, what is a financial plan? It basically is your customized roadmap to get you from where you are today to where you want to be 5, 10, 15 years from now. It's completely based on your goals, your priorities, and the resources that you have available to you. All of our plans are comprehensive. So, what that means is that they address the three foundational cornerstones. We talk about insurances, we talk about investments, we talk about banking. And this comprehensive planning approach allows us to address all the financial priorities that most families have. The First Command advisors go through a rigorous licensing and training program where they develop broad expertise. They learn about things like debt management, retirement income planning, and so on. And this really enables them to holistically address a family's needs. And you know, our advisors are also fiduciaries. What that means is that they are obligated to put the client's interests first,
Mm.
ahead of themselves and ahead of our company. And here's one thing that really sets us apart. The majority of our advisors actually come from the military community. Either they've served themselves, or they're a military spouse, or they grew up in a military family. And that's important because what that means is that they have a deep understanding of military life and they have expertise in military pay and benefits and so on. This kind of background makes them really effective at working with military families. They can understand the unique challenges that they face and then to help create meaningful plans to address them.
It's so helpful that the folks that work with and for First Command know about the military life. I think that gives just an extra boost of credibility to what you all are doing and also confidence to your clients and military families who are like, do they really understand the military life? Because it's so different than civilian as far as benefits, pay, promotions, etc. So I think that's really neat that you guys press into that, and so many of your advisors are directly tied with the military in one way or the other.
Yeah, I couldn't
Gives
agree more.
Yeah, it gives a lot of confidence if someone wants to sit down with an advisor, because I know a lot of us know we should. There's a should sit down with a financial advisor, but often we're kind of hesitant. I confess right now, I was nervous when we first went to First Command and met with George here in El Paso. But it's been really worth it for us. What would you maybe say to those military families who are on the fence about meeting with First Command advisor?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That hesitation, that reluctance, it's a very common sentiment. And I would be very quick to remind folks that are feeling that way that you are absolutely not alone in having that kind of feeling. Any kind of significant change that we set out to make, it's hard. No matter how obvious the benefits might be, right? It's still
Mhm.
hard to take that step and make that change. And the prospect of sharing your personal financial details, well, that's intimidating in its own way. Many people are probably embarrassed about the situation that they're in and reluctant to share those details with others, right? That's totally understandable. Here's what I would really emphasize to folks that are having that concern. It's really important to understand that financial advisors are not interested in judging you.
Mm.
Remember, many of them have actually been in similar situations themselves, right? That's where they come from too. Their focus really is on gaining an understanding of where you are and what you want to accomplish so that they can construct a plan for you to efficiently and effectively get from here to there. And those things that are holding you back, those embarrassing situations that you're thinking of, having that conversation and getting an advisor to work with you on those issues is likely the path to finding a solution and getting rid of those problems to begin with, right? So we really got to get through that process to have the good results at the other end. And let me share a piece of good news with you on this front. This actually comes from an independent research study that First Command commissions. It's called the Financial Behaviors Index. And what we do is we have a research firm and they go out and they survey military and civilian families. And they ask them all sorts of financial questions, right? What are your concerns? What are your saving
Mhm.
habits? Tell me about your retirement readiness. What's your plan for emergencies? What's your outlook and confidence about the financial future? All that kind of stuff. Now, we've been commissioning this work quarterly since 2008. And one of the findings over that time has been that military families are actually better than the general population at practicing positive behaviors, stuff like paying down debt and saving money. The military community is better at this than the
Hmm.
public at large. And that makes sense when you think about it, because what do military families have? They have discipline, they're goal oriented, they know how to make sacrifices to get to what they need to get to, right? That it's built in. So you're already predisposed to doing the right things in this area. All you're likely missing is the clarity on what you actually need to do. And that's where an advisor can really help because they can provide those concrete strategies to get you moving in the right direction.
That is super powerful, Nitty, and also just really great news. But I'm going to push back and I want to know, if it's true, then why is it that so many military families struggle financially?
That's a great question because gosh, isn't that how it feels? Right? It
Hmm.
feels like no matter how hard you try, that it's just not enough sometimes. And I often explain this by saying that what we're all doing is we're playing a game. We're playing the money game. But most of us were never taught the rules.
Mm.
Now, think about that. Think about it. When were you ever taught how to make a budget or how to be responsible with your credit? or how investing works, how taxes work, the importance of living below your means, or the value of starting to save and invest early. When did somebody sit us down and teach us about all
Mm,
this? Now, compare that with something else. Think back to when your service member joined the military. They were taught everything, starting with the very basics: how to march, how to position their cap, how to hold a weapon, how to make their bed. Boot camp essentially focused on the most fundamental things because we understand that those building blocks lay the foundation for all future success. We get that. But did that happen in the money game?
mm.
Right? Most of us were just thrown in, no guidance, no context. You don't even know what the objective of the game is when you get started. And then there's nobody around who you can turn to for guidance. Is it any wonder that people struggle? One of the things that I love about First Command and that I'm really, really proud of, and that keeps me engaged and passionate about our mission, is the educational process that we take our clients through. It's really, really important to us that families understand not only what they're supposed to do, but also why those things are important. And we actually take the time to educate them on the basics of personal finance, actually teach them the rules of the game. And that can be so empowering. Let me share another finding from that same financial behaviors index study that I mentioned earlier. Now, the numbers vary every quarter, right? There's always a little bit of fluctuation, but
Mhm.
this pattern has been incredibly consistent. So, in the last quarter of 2020, the survey found that of all the military families who work with a financial coach, 79% of them felt very confident or extremely confident that their financial situation was going to improve in the upcoming year, 79%. And when we compare that with families who didn't have a coach but were trying to manage their own finances without the support of an advisor, only 40% of them had that same confidence level. That's a pretty stark difference in expectations. And I believe it's the result of the empowerment that comes from being educated on the rules and knowing that you've got a solid strategy in place. It makes all the difference in how you feel about where you're going.
Gosh, I totally agree with that, and I was kinda chuckling as you were talking about the money game because no one did. Like, I specifically I'm a testament to that of, like, no one sat me down and said, "Here's what you need to do to be financially an adult." Like, that never happened for me, and, I just love how you framed that, and those statistics also are very striking because my husband and I, we're like, "Hey, we've got First Command on our side. We're gonna be okay." It does instill just this great confidence in our financial situation, so much more than when we were trying to go it alone. I would say that probably most military families, of course, want to make good financial choices. So what advice would you have for us as military families to make that happen?
Well, one of the first things I recommend that families do is to start by getting your financial life organized, because that will help you understand where you are. And then that will help you figure out what the right next steps are that you might want to take, right? So, very fundamentally, if you don't have a system to keep track of your finances, create one. Don't let your hard earned money be wasted on things like late fees and interest charges, because those things are almost guaranteed to happen if you don't have a basic system to help you stay on track, right? So that's kind of the very first step. And then keep that system current. So if you've got a paper system, take the time to shred the old statements, reorganize your folders, and get things in order. If possible, you might want to think about switching from paper to electronic statements because it helps reduce the clutter, the potential for fraud, and a lot of people, frankly, find it easier to keep up with. But that is really just a personal preference. You might also think about taking advantage of services like paperless billing and automatic payments. Again, what does this do? It makes it easier for you to track, make sure you've met your obligations, and also it helps you make and stick to a monthly budget. It simplifies bill paying and record keeping. And if you're like me, I'm more likely to stick to something if it's simple and easy. So really take the opportunity and set yourself up for success on this front. And then the next step, and this is probably one of the most important tips I can share with your listeners. Once you've gotten organized, really take it one step further and make a budget. List all the things that you spend your money on, all of your
Mm,
expenses. Because you got to have a firm understanding of how your money is being spent, right? That's a must have step before you can realistically go forward to your goals, like paying down debt or saving for the future. You got to know where the money goes today and where can you free up some if that's what you're trying to do. Do this on paper, use an app, use a software program. It doesn't matter. It's all up to your personal preference, but get that budget in place because that's going to give you a lot of insight on where you need to go next. And then lastly, take a moment and look ahead. Anticipate and plan for any big expenses that you might have coming up, right? It's much better to set aside a monthly amount now and be ready for that expense when it comes instead of having to go into debt because you didn't plan for it until the last minute. You really don't want to take something that was probably a short term need and turn it into a long term burden that really plagues you over time. A little bit of planning can go a long way in that area.
Very salient wisdom for things that we can do right now in our current financial situation. But I know a lot of military families, of course, we're looking toward the future, maybe for when we ETS, retire, transition, etc. So I'm going to infer that many of our military spouses listening probably have those long term goals that honestly seem a little bit out of reach right now. So, what's the first step in reaching those?
Yeah, any big goal, can seem intimidating at first. So I love that you're asking about how do we tackle it. So, firstly, I would say it helps to be specific, right? It's hard to hit a goal that you can't really see clearly. So, a very common goal that a lot of people have, I'm going to start saving money.
Hmm.
Well, it's hard to aim for that because what does that mean? And how do you know if you hit it, right? Maybe you think of making it a little bit more specific. How about something like, I'm going to build an emergency fund that's equal to 2 months worth of pay. That is much more concrete. It's much easier to understand what that means and then to be able to measure your progress towards it. And then don't get overwhelmed. Big goals can be overwhelming, especially if we haven't made much progress yet. But don't get overwhelmed. And one of the best strategies for that is to take the big task and divide it down into small steps. Those are not only easier to achieve, they're also easier to track. And seeing small successes is going to help you build confidence to start making bigger strides in the future. So, again, I'm going to save more money. Well, what does that mean? You might say, I'm going to start saving $25 a month every month into my savings account for that emergency fund goal, right? What's the step I need to do every day, every week, every month so that you can track it along the way? And you might find that you have to start with a small amount, and that's okay. It's perfectly fine because the amount is not the most important thing. The really valuable part of this is the positive habit that you're laying. That's going to become the foundation, and it's going to make it so much easier for you to build on and grow those habits as you move along. Whenever you can, make it automatic. That's a big one, right? A lot of us we drag our feet. We procrastinate on taking the actions that we know are good for us. I like to say, turn that pattern around in your favor. Set up a good habit, set up those constructive practices automatically. And now I might procrastinate to cancel that. So as long as I'm being lazy, the good things are happening for me without me having to put any mental energy into it, right? And it takes effort now to undermine my positive habit. So those kind of little things make a big difference. What does that look like? Well, automate those savings transfers, right? Or for long-term goals, make sure you've got those automatic deductions out of your payroll going into your TSP account. These things are all going to just become automatic the longer you do them. And over time, you'll start seeing the results from those positive efforts. You know, when we look ahead and plan our spending, I think it's really, really important that we have an objective and a clear goal in mind that you're going to have to balance your present needs today and the future goals that you're working towards. We got to find a balance. A good rule of thumb that I always share with folks is you should live on 80% of your earnings and take the other 20% and put it for your future goals. That's a gift from you to your future self for the life that you're working towards.
And as long as you have that automatically coming out of your either your LES, DFAS or, from First Command or whatever, that's why I was laughing. It's like, well, once it's in there, we actually have to like do something to cancel it, and that's really unlikely. I'm because like I don't even cancel emails because I'm like, I gotta click a button. Nah, I'll just keep deleting them. It's fine. But that's really really empowering advice there, especially looking towards the future. Nidhi, I think it kind of goes without saying that this pandemic has been, gosh, just so hard for so many families across the country. Is there anything that families should be especially careful with to avoid right now at this time?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that, Sharita, because, we've seen a lot of families and military families in particular be affected by this pandemic in so many different ways. And when we face any sort of financial hardship or difficulty, you know what the first thing most people are tempted to do is? They're going to stop funding their financial plans,
Hmm.
right? It's one of the easiest places to go because it seems like it doesn't have an immediate consequence. But I got to tell you, that is a bad move in almost any circumstance. Because what you're essentially doing is that you're setting yourself up to rob your future to deal with something that's going on today short term. And that's not something that any of us would knowingly or willingly want to do. It can be tempting to say, I'll save less for now, or I won't put as much in my TSP, or maybe I'll just cancel that insurance policy. But gosh, we got to ask ourselves, God forbid, what if something tragic happens in your family
Hmm.
and you just got rid of that insurance because there was a cash crunch, in the short term? That the reason you had that policy was to protect your family. Did that need change because of what's going on with the pandemic? I'd say, if anything, those needs become more critical than ever because of the pandemic and other difficult circumstances. So, this is the time to really buckle down and show that commitment, that discipline to keep doing the things that are going to keep your family safe and that are going to protect your long term security.
I totally agree with that. Keeping our eyes focused on the future, pressing forward to know that COVID will not last forever, even though it feels like it, even though that the financial crunch that so many of us are in right now will not last forever, to, protect our family, keep that going and protect our future. Just so important for us to keep in the forefront of our minds. So, a few moments ago, you mentioned TSP, which is a topic that I would say is confusing for some people, myself included. We do the TSP thing, and honestly, that's me just nodding and smiling a lot when my husband talks about it. He understands all the ins and outs in that. But I would love to know more about TSP contributions specifically.
Yeah, that's a great topic and one that I love to talk about because TSP is a significant portion of retirement planning for military families, right? So it's really important that we understand what it is and how do we use it in our family's best interest. So let's get into that. So years ago, people would go to work for a company, often in the private sector, and then they would work for that company their entire career, right? And when it came time to retire, they would get a guaranteed lifetime pension from the company. And that's kind of the old way that things worked. And over time, companies started realizing that that was a pretty expensive way to go.
Mm.
And so they gradually stopped offering pensions and they switched over instead to 401k plans. And with a 401k, it's really now up to the individual worker to contribute money into the plan. And then the company might match a portion of your contributions as a benefit, right? But it's really now the individual that's saving for their future. So let's apply that to the military. The Thrift Savings Plan, or TSP, is the government's version of a corporate 401k. That's what it is. It's a 401k
Mm.
plan. It's just called TSP. And the government, in addition to TSP, does also provide a pension to service members who retire with at least 20 years of service. But a few years ago, they introduced the blended retirement system. And what that did was it took the pension and it reduced it, cut it down by about 20%. But what families got in exchange for that reduction was that the government would start making contributions into TSP for the service member. So now you start getting a little bit on both sides, right? A pension if you complete 20 years, and also government contributions into your TSP account. But here's the distinction. To get the pension, like we said earlier, you have to serve at least 20 years. So some people get that, but not everybody.
Hmm.
But the TSP part is portable. And that means that whenever you retire or transition out of the military, you take that money with you, regardless of how long you served. And for families that don't anticipate making a 20-year career, that's a pretty big deal. And
Hmm.
then the government will put money into TSP on your behalf if you are in the blended retirement system. So if you're in that program, whenever you make a 5% contribution, you're also eligible to get an extra 5% from Uncle Sam's pocket into your account. Now, obviously, coming from someone else's pocket, that's a benefit that you want to maximize every
Mm-hmm.
time.
Absolutely. Very solid information. So, just so that I'm getting this right, when things get tight financially, obviously, as you mentioned a few moments ago, people might be tempted to maybe skip making those TSP contributions. But it sounds like you're saying that they shouldn't do that because if they do, it's essentially leaving money, free money on the table.
Yeah, that's exactly what
Mm,
happens when you skip contributions. You are leaving free money on the table. Let me give you an example of what that looks like. So, for example, let's say someone's making a 5% contribution each pay period, right? And then they get the 5% government contribution each time. So now something comes up, they have a short term situation, and they decide they're going to skip a contribution. So obviously, they don't put their money in and they miss out on the match on the contribution that they didn't make. That makes sense. And then let's say they wise up, they figure out this was not the best move, and they decide they're going to make up for it. So the next month they say, I'm going to make a 10% contribution and I'll be good. So when they make the 10% contribution, that's great. But the maximum match you can get is 5% per cycle.
mm, mhm.
So that 5% they missed out on when they didn't make the contribution, they're never going to be able to make that up. They've now missed out on free money that could have been put into their retirement plan out of somebody else's pocket. And that's what we'd want to avoid. These kind of things, these good habits, saving and investing, they're so easy to break. It seems inconsequential at the moment, but they're so hard to get back into. And the truth is, there's a significant long term opportunity cost when we do stuff like that. And
Mm.
you really don't want to undermine your productive habits just to deal with a short term situation that might be going on.
Wow, that really, really makes me think as far as like if you skip a contribution cycle, like you can truly never get that time slash 5% back. Like that is powerful and I think something that all of us needed to hear, maybe take some notes on and keep kind of in the back of our brains next time we're tempted to try and skip or think about canceling that, even if we say it's just for a little while. Nidhi, you are so obviously you're very good at what you do, especially with all of your expertise, your passion for serving military families and representing First Command. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. And so before we wrap up today, I would love for you to share with our listeners how someone can get in touch with a First Command advisor if they want to get started with a financial plan or begin that relationship with First Command.
Absolutely. I'm happy to share that with you. So, First Command has located our offices very purposefully near most of the major military installations. And that's by design, right? So that we can be
Mhm.
accessible to the families that we want to serve. And our advisors are available to meet with families either in person or remotely in a safe manner that everyone's comfortable with. So, the best way to get started is to visit our website. It's www.firstcommand.com. And you can enter just a very little bit of information about who you are and how to contact you and where you're located. And we will find an advisor in your local area and get you guys hooked up so that you can take it to the next step.
I love that you guys keep it simple and that it's so accessible for military families around the world with your what almost just shy of 200 like 180, is that right, or
That's right.
170? Yeah,
Mhm.
180. Wow, look at me remembering stuff. That's exciting. That's so cool. 180 locations around the world, that military families and service members can get connected and get started and get squared away with their financial plan. So Nidhi, as always, I truly appreciate you making time in your very busy schedule to come on to our show to share these valuable resources with our listeners. We just want to say thanks for all you do in your support of military families and of Army Wife Network.
Thanks so much for the invitation, Sharita. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation.
Listeners, I highly encourage you to get connected with First Command Financial Services, both in person, and online. You can check them out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at First Command, or as Nidhi mentioned, on their website, which is the best place to get started and get squared away, firstcommand.com.